So I was planning to go to Santa Fe, New Mexico in a couple of days to start shooting a film that was written by Mickey Rooney and starring Mickey Rooney. And I got a note from two of my cousins back in Tennessee, Sue and Louise, and these two had been were genealogical sleuths. They'd been tracking down all our ancestors for a number of years. Going back, they hung out in the bowels of the courthouses all through Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Tennessee. And they had been searching for this one fellow, my great-great-grandfather, one of my great-great-grandfathers. His name was Henry Maggart, Jr., and they couldn't come up with anything, but their note was to say at this time that they had come up with a little item there. They'd heard from somebody from Missouri that they had received a letter or a note or something, a correspondence of some sort from Henry Maggart Jr. From Santa Fe in 1849. And now that kind of fits right in, because he would be going west for the gold rush right through that time. It's a little south from what the trail would be for him, but maybe he was got lost, or he wanted to see Santa Fe. I don't know. There were a lot of soldiers there back then. You know, it was before New Mexico was a state, but we did have militia there, and there was a lot of problems there with Mexicans and Indians and our military, and so it wasn't a dead town then. Anyway, so I thought that was really interesting when you think about coincidences and synchronicity, and the synchronicity did come to mind, putting these things together. I'm going to Santa Fe. I'd never been to Santa Fe before, and they wanted me to pick up the search on my end, because I was out west and they were back east, and I knew nothing about tracking down people, but since I was going to be in Santa Fe, and he was heard from Santa Fe, that while I was there, on days I wasn't shooting, I would extend myself a little and go around town and ask, go in bookstores and whatnot, and I was sent by somebody in the bookstore, sent me to the courthouse to go look in their archives down there, can go through the microfiche down there, but they told me that my chances of finding him were slim to none, unless he was really famous during that time, or infamous. Maybe he was a bad guy or something. So anyway, I went to the courthouse, and I went down in the bowels there, and I started going through the microfiche, click, 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 and I came upon the front page of the very first issue of Santa Fe's newspaper. It was called the New Mexican, and it was published on November the 4th. It's the first year, November the 4th, 1849. Now, Henry was, it seems like he would be there at that time, and since the first issue of a paper would be kind of a big thing. If he was there, he would have taken a look at that paper. Of course, strange little thing to make me feel close to him by looking at that old paper, and then thinking he might have looked at that same. And on the front page of that paper, there was a poem on the front page of a paper, and it was just a little poem, and it was anonymously written, and it was called Sober Down Poetry. I don't know why it was called Sober Down Poetry, but it was about a boy and a girl who were falling in love in a garden while they were picking and shelling beans and dropping the beans into their receptacle, a tin pan or something like that, and it made the ka-plunk, ka-plunk. And in the poem it says that they were so involved that the only sound they heard was the rattling of the beans. And that was the essence of the poem, just a short 3 stanzas, I think. So I thought, wow, anonymously written, huh? Well, what if old Henry had written that poem? Okay. chances are not. But let's say he did. Let's say he wrote that poem about his lady back in Tennessee, and he was on his way to get gold, pick up the gold that was on the ground waiting for him so he could take that back to Tennessee and buy that stretch of farmland in Horseshoe Bend, Tennessee, along the banks of the Cumberland River. It's like in the garden, I call it the Garden of the State. And I kind of decided that I was just, my mind was going into this, my imagination was going like crazy. And then it hit me all of a sudden again that my hometown church, the Methodist Church in Carthage, Tennessee, had sent me, not too long ago, had sent me a notice that they were planning a time capsule that they would put in the ground or put somewhere that to be opened in 2108. Is that right? Yeah. This is in 2008, so 100 years from that down. Is that right? 21. Anyway, 100 years later, and they wanted people to write about how they felt about their church, their relationship with the church, how they felt about that, and so forth. And people would, 100 years from now, would open it up and get some idea of how people thought about, at least thought about the church at that time. So I thought, what a great idea to not only write about the church, write about everything. In 100, I would love to have read things held in my hands that my ancestors had written 100 years ago or 200 years ago or all on back. I would even want to hear more from my father while he was, hadn't been gone too long. Certainly when I was in 100 years, I'd like to know, more about what he was like when he was a teenage boy, and what my mother was like, what they thought about, and what they were afraid of, what they'd like to say in public but didn't want to suffer the ridicule of thinking different ways, or politically, or whatever. But I would surely think about this, and I did. I thought, well, maybe I should do that now. I should sit down. I've been writing a lot of stuff for many years. But I should sit down and put everything I know and make it. It wouldn't have to be nonfiction. It could be a little of both. It could be fiction and nonfiction, and I could have poetry in it, which I've written a lot of, in song lyrics, and especially fable. When I was in college, I was very impressed by a little book. It was called God's Trombones. I think by somebody named Peyton. I'm not sure right now. That one of the sermons in it was called The Creation, and it describes. It was like it was described as an old Negro sermon, and it was so beautiful, and a way of describing what I guess the Christians thought about the creation of the world, how God reached down and picked up the dirt and took, that story. But it was very impressive. And I also read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that, of course, much later than that. And he would go back, he didn't let time or space bother him. He would go back and forth, and you get so lost sometimes, but I thought, well, if you could go back a century, come back here, come back, you wouldn't know who we're talking. So I wouldn't go that far. And there was a song I heard Tony Bennett sing, Lost in the Stars. It was from the Kurt Weill Anderson musical Lost in the Stars, based on Cry the Beloved Country, the book. And anyway, this song I heard him sing was Lost in the Stars, which a little bit on the same thing, was about creation and sung. But it was just, so I was so impressed. I guess that got into my psyche somehow, so I would include a fable, and I would talk about the creation, and I would probably write a book that's way too long. Then I would include my life. I would bring it all the way up from from when I'm going to say Henry was born 4 million years ago in Africa, and then he came through Europe, and then he came to America, and then he didn't know about it, but when he passed away, he lived on in his son, and they don't know. Every generation didn't know that they'd lived before, and they would skip generations, and of course, when it got to 1933, the year I was born, I would pick it up there and let it be pretty much my life story. It's a part of this 300-year odyssey beginning in 1714, when one of the Henrys came over, Hans came over from Switzerland and landed in Pennsylvania, then in Virginia, then down into Tennessee, and I would take that and create. I'd write a book about it, and I did. I wrote a book and I called it Papa's Footprint, and I wrote it so that my children wouldn't have to wait 100 years to read it. They wouldn't even be here in 100 years. But I would finish it and I'd let them read it now, and they could ask me questions. Now I had seven children and 5 grandchildren, and I was thinking, you know, each and every one of them would picked up bits and pieces about my life, what I thought about things, and I would talk to one. They said, "I didn't know you thought." And I said, "Yeah, I've said this for many years." And they said, "Well, you didn't tell me." I said, "Oh, I see what it is now. If you tell one kid and another kid and another one, you'd think you told everybody, but you hadn't, because they didn't tell about it." So here's the deal: to write it down so everybody can read the same story about their dad and what he thought about things, his sense of humor. And I wrote mostly then about from 1933 about my journey through college, and going to be an opera singer, and became a Broadway person, and then a television and radio, so forth like that, and all my questions and dealing with some of the stars that I dealt with on Broadway, I find interesting. But the whole thing was, I'd write it for them, but it must be interesting enough. It must have humor. It must be interesting enough to get their attention, so they'd read it in the first place. They could read it now. They could read it when they get older, because I know young people are not so interested in reading about what old people like to read about sometimes. So I set out to do that, and I did it, and I call it Papa's Footprint. And I hope that not only my children and grandchildren like it, but I hope everybody does, and maybe it will spur you to write down things for your children and grandchildren. You know, a scrap of paper or a page or two in a book. Thank you.